لا تقبل المساومة. حان الوقت أمام السيد ضابية الذي هو أيضا يتلقى الوحي من الله كي يهدي البشرية امبراطورية جديدة تبدأ بحرب صليبية جديدة. على الأقل كانت هذه وجهة نظر بن لادن بينما مضى في طريقه إلى ما يسمى غزوة منهاتن بعد ذلك بأقل من عام.
ما زالوا في الشهور الأولى من حكمهم قالوا سوف ننقل السفارة الأمريكية إلى القدس، والقدس ستبقى عاصمة أبدية لإسرائيل، وصفق لهم الكونغرس ومجلس النواب. فهم لا يفقهون غير لغة الضرب وغير لغة القتل. رفعت الأقلام وجفت الصحف، فلا تشاور أحدا في قتل الأمريكان.
Just joining us this morning, you're in for a horrific surprise. Rescue crews are making their way to the scene, and all of this unfolding in one of the busiest places in the world, in downtown Manhattan.
Look how fast he's going.
He's going right up the Hudson River Center.
Oh my God.
Prince Bandar bin Sultan is the Saudi ambassador to the United States. Prince Bandar, thank you, sir, for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Chris. Bin Laden is not big news in Saudi Arabia as a terrorist. You know why? Because we knew he was a terrorist before the 11th of September. He was stripped from his nationality, his people were chased, his people were behind the attack that killed 5 American soldiers in Saudi Arabia 4 or 5 years ago. When we captured them, we tried them under Sharia law, we executed them. Guess what? Western media said we did something terrible. We're killing dissidents. You know, those dissidents, when we chased them in Saudi Arabia, right, the followers of Osama bin Laden, they escaped to London, Paris, Frankfurt, America. On the 10th of September, most of those people were called dissidents. On the 12th, they were called terrorists.
Well, has your government dug into who these 15 people are and why they did it to us, what they did to us on September 11th?
But, Chris, you just proved my point. You cannot take yes for an answer. I'm saying we called them terrorists before 11 September. You called them dissident. After the 11th of September, the same people became terrorists to you. You switched their category from dissident to terrorist. For us, they are terrorists.
But why doesn't this family go after him? Why doesn't the family, why don't you freeze the assets?
This is the tragedy, and you have to forgive me. The American media is either lazy or ignorant. This man, his family froze his assets. They disavowed of him. They disowned him. The government stripped him from his nationality. To understand the Saudi sentiment, they will say, and we cannot understand why before 11 September you considered people like him dissidents. They were dissidents. They were evil. They were terrorists. You were saying because they were this way because you don't give them freedom of speech. You're right, because what they were speaking was poisonous and evil.
Prince Bandar, Your Highness, thank you for joining us.
That freedom can be the future of everyone. That freedom can be the future of everyone.
We told them what we believe, that there is no need to go to war in Iraq in order to achieve the objectives. And this is on record.
You talk to them saying that you can overthrow Saddam without going to war?
Without going to war.
How would you have done that?
We believe because Iraq was isolated. The United States troops were arrayed around Iraq from the sea, from the land, from everywhere. And all we thought had to be done was to tell the Iraqi government and to tell the Iraqi army that, listen, this man is not going to stay. You have two choices. You can stay with him or cooperate with us and save Iraq from future problems. And if you cooperate with us, we will protect you. Rather than kick out the government and disband the...
لبعض الدول التي قد تعتبر مغلوبة على أمرها. دعنا نأخذ دولة قطر مثلا. دولة قطر دولة صغيرة، قال وزير خارجيتها في إحدى المرات أنني محاط بقوى عظمى ممكن أن تمحوني من الخارطة بكل سهولة، لذلك أنا مضطر للتحالف مع الأمريكان وغير الأمريكان. فهذا الكلام أيضا ألا يمكن التماس عذر لدولة مثل قطر.
We received all your troops at that time. We took all the blame. And from that time, we was your partner fighting in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Yemen, elsewhere from our base. And we was taking the full security for your guys, which they are there and host. Assalamu alaikum.
John McCain, Barack Obama, and Hillary Clinton have been partners in creating and arming ISIS. Here are the facts. In 2011, John McCain was the lead voice in the Senate calling for arming of the so-called Libyan rebels to overthrow Colonel Gaddafi. McCain even traveled to Benghazi in April of 2011 and called them his heroes.
Are you concerned about the people that are actually fighting for the opposition here? Any worries about them?
Fighting for the opposition? They're my heroes.
Just 1 year later, McCain's heroes used those weapons to kill Ambassador Chris Stevens and 3 other brave Americans. After McCain, Obama, and Hillary had turned Libya into a terrorist playground, they shifted their attention to equipping the opposition against Assad in Syria. A 2012 State Department memo clearly says the opposition to Assad was Al-Qaeda in Iraq. That's right. The same terrorists who our soldiers had been fighting in Iraq became McCain's new heroes in Syria. In May of 2013, McCain traveled to Syria and was photographed with Syrian rebels, who may well have become leading figures in what would later be called ISIS. McCain returned to the United States and lobbied Congress to fund, arm, and support these Al-Qaeda freedom fighters to the tune of $500 million. Last year we learned McCain's Syrian scheme yielded only 4 or 5 good rebels actually fighting Assad.
There are only 4 or 5 U.S.-trained Syrian fighters on the ground fighting ISIS, not 400 or 500.
The rest took our training and weapons and became ISIS. Just this week, John McCain bragged about an additional $1.3 billion to provide weapons to more Syrian jihadists and to provide border security. Not in Arizona, but in Lebanon and Jordan. I'm Dr. Kelly Ward, and I'm running for the United States Senate because John McCain has equipped our enemies, put our soldiers in harm's way, and turned even our own American soil into a battleground. Arizona needs a senator who represents Arizona, not ISIS.
دارت أسئلة عدة حول ما يسمى بتنظيم الدولة الإسلامية في العراق والشام داعش منذ ظهوره عام 2013، منها أسئلة عن ظروف تأسيس هذا التنظيم، الداعمين والممولين له. وفقا لما جاء في كتاب وزيرة الخارجية الأمريكية السابقة هيلاري كلينتون والذي صدر بعنوان الخيارات الصعبة، فقد أسست الإدارة الأمريكية داعش بهدف تنفيذ مشروع الشرق الأوسط الكبير وتقسيم المنطقة على أساس مذهبي وعرقي. يؤكد على هذا الكلام العميل الأمريكي الفار إدوارد سنودن الذي يكشف عن تعاون استخباري بين أمريكا وبريطانيا وإسرائيل لتأسيس هذا التنظيم من أجل حماية أمن إسرائيل واستقطاب إرهابيي العالم إلى داعش، بالإضافة إلى تكفير الآخر ومحاولة إلغائه وتشويش الإسلام وفتح حروب ونزاعات مستمرة. وتعتبر العملية خطة بريطانية قديمة وتعرف باسم عش الدبابير، علما أن البغدادي قد تلقى تدريبات على أيدي الموساد لمدة عام واحد، كما وتعلم فن الخطابة وعلم اللاهوت. تنظيم الدولة الإسلامية داعش هو ليس التنظيم الإرهابي الأول الذي تخلقه أمريكا، فهو اللاحق لتنظيم القاعدة في أفغانستان الذي هدف إلى مواجهة الاتحاد السوفيتي تنفيذا لمصالحها. مي الياس، إحنا تي في.
قلت له: لماذا أنتم تسلحون أعداءنا ويقتلون فينا؟ هكذا تصنعون؟ فيقول ضحك وبكل صراحة قال: ما مضمونه أنه الأمن القومي الإيراني يقتضي ذلك، أنه العراق تظل فيه الحروب الداخلية مشتعلة حتى أمريكا تغرق في العراق ولا تلتفت إلى إيران. القضية هكذا، هؤلاء دينهم السياسة ودينهم كرسيهم، فحكومة إيران لا اعتبار بها، حكومة مسلوبة الشرعية.
لو كنا نخالفك الحكم عليهم والمعتقد فيهم، ظل أمراء الدولة الإسلامية يخاطبون قاعدة الجهاد خطاب الجنود للأمراء، خطاب التلميذ لأستاذه والطالب لشيخه، خطاب الصغير لكبيره، وظلت الدولة الإسلامية تلتزم نصائح وتوجيهات شيوخ الجهاد ورموزه. ولذلك لم تضرب الدولة الإسلامية الروافض في إيران منذ نشأتها، وتركت الروافض آمنين في إيران، وكبحت جماح جنودها المستشيطين غضبا، رغم قدرتها آنذاك على تحويل إيران لبرك من الدماء، وكظمت غيظها كل هذه السنين تتحمل التهم بالعمالة لألد أعدائها إيران لعدم استهدافها، تاركة الروافض ينعمون فيها بالأمن والأمان امتثالا لأمر القاعدة للحفاظ على مصالحها وخطوط إمدادها في إيران. نعم، كبحت جماح جنودها وكظمت غيظها على مدار سنين حفاظا على وحدة كلمة المجاهدين ورص صفهم. فليسجل التاريخ أن للقاعدة دين ثمين في عنق إيران.
Court action today in the Canadian terror plot to blow up a passenger train that runs between New York City and Toronto. Investigators say the suspects got support from al-Qaeda elements in Iran, but there is no evidence the Iranian government was behind the plot. Iran is not only saying it had nothing to do with this plot, it also denied that al-Qaeda has any presence within its borders. You believe that? Let's ask Ambassador John Bolton. He's former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations and a Fox News contributor. No surprise, I suppose, that the Iranians deny any official involvement or even unofficial involvement in this plot.
Right, but it's been known for a long time there have been al-Qaeda elements in Iran, including relatives of Osama bin Laden, and it's always been a little bit of a conundrum. Are they there using Iran as a base of operations? Are they being held as hostages by Iran, or is it some combination? I think the way the Mounties described this yesterday was quite interesting, that the two accused terrorists were acting under, their words, direction and control of these elements of al-Qaeda in Iran.
This is the world's first glimpse of Hamza bin Laden as a man. Now in his 20s, he's the son of the former al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden and believed to be a potential future leader of the armed group. Home videos, Osama's journal, and a list of his and his family's viewing habits are among the 470,000 files seized during the raid on bin Laden's Pakistan compound in 2011. He was killed by U.S. Navy SEALs. But what's also making headlines in the U.S. are revelations about al-Qaeda links to Iran. It's alleged Iran offered al-Qaeda money, weapons, and training to hit American targets in the Gulf. Iran denies that and points out that it imprisoned bin Laden's family and other al-Qaeda members. This is already a precarious moment for Iran-U.S. relations. President Donald Trump is hoping to scuttle a nuclear deal negotiated by the Obama administration and 5 countries.
The Iranian dictatorship's aggression continues to this day. The regime remains the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism and provides assistance to al-Qaeda, the Taliban, Hezbollah, Hamas, and other terrorist networks.
The CIA release of al-Qaeda documents also comes as ISIL is in retreat. There's speculation al-Qaeda is hoping to capitalize on the group's weakened state.
A way to, I mean, as Director Panetta said earlier, they've really been effectively able to play both sides of this argument. Are they able to do this because they feel emboldened in the region? And if so, what do you put this down to?
Well, I mean, the ability to play both sides is in part because the Obama administration allowed them to play both sides for some period of time. I think the president is committed to stopping that. So President Trump is committed to stopping that. Some elements of the Trump administration may have a different viewpoint, especially if they worked on this file in the Obama administration. But ultimately, I mean, we're the biggest, strongest, richest, most powerful nation in the world. And if we want a country like Qatar to not play both sides of the street, to get on our side of the street once and for all, which, by the way, is not just in our interest or the GCC's interest, it's in their interest in the long term too, we have a lot of tools to make that happen, and that's what we should focus on.
How can you explain to people watching 60 Minutes how one of the smallest countries in the world is having the kind of influence it's having?
We live in the age of globalization, and sizes do not matter anymore. It depends on, if you like, on your will, on your political will. This country has a will. What's wrong with that? I mean, as you know, in the Arab world now, most of the major countries, big countries, they are not doing anything. They are hopeless, actually, politically, socially, economically. So why not?
Of course it's why not, but how did it come to be?
They looked around and they found a big vacuum to be filled. And they filled this vacuum.
The people of those countries who's asking for justice and dignity.
That's influence.
Okay, if this is influence.
It was interesting. I had the Emir of Qatar come by the Oval Office today, and he owns Al Jazeera, basically. Pretty influential guy, and he is a big booster, big promoter of democracy all throughout the Middle East. Reform, reform, reform. You're seeing it on Al Jazeera. Now, he himself is not reforming significantly. Now, there's no big move towards democracy in Qatar.
Regarding Al-Qaeda, Muslim Brotherhood, and all the terrorist and any terrorist organization, Qatar is not supporting.
تجعل الإنسان الذي يقاتل أو يركب كما قلت شاحنته ويدخل إلى قلاع العدو ليفجر نفسه ويستشهد، يدخل مطمئن القلب مبتسم سعيد، لأنه سينتقل. الموت في عقيدتنا ليس فناء، وإنما هو بداية.
As to Qatar, Emir Al-Thani is trying to perform an effort of political gymnastics that would have disabled Nadia Comaneci. Look at the splits. He seeks to have one foot with the Brotherhood and the extremist Sunni. He seeks to put another foot with the United States, the moderate Sunni, and the Gulf Cooperation Council. And while these legs are separated beyond human capacity, he's trying to do it all while kissing Ayatollah Khamenei. That is a disabling act of political gymnastics. He may believe that we are obligated to protect his regime because he hosts an American political base.
I believe military strikes
by the United States and or Israel would be back on the agenda. In such an air campaign, the United States may wish to use the Al Udeid air base in your country, sir. Given your country's ties to Iran, I'm curious about your take on this, and specifically, will you allow the air base in Qatar to be used in airstrikes against Iran should that eventuate?
Iran, this is the subject which we are all dealing with today. Blame should not be in Qatar alone. We cannot change our geography. We are neighbor with Iran. We share the largest single-walled natural gas with Iran. We are not.
I think it's extremely important. Look, I think Qatar has now said that they want to abide by international requirements with regards to financing of terrorism. They've passed laws to try to implement requirements against financing of terrorism. They say that they want to do the right thing. I think the issue is now to make sure that what they say is what they do. And that means making sure that they are enforcing efforts to limit their support. And that ultimately is the way to try to ultimately reach some kind of solution. I know that United States, Secretary Tillerson, are working on that. I know that Kuwait has provided some assistance to try to bring those parties together. But I think you really need to have a commitment by Qatar that they are, in fact, going to abide.
أعضاء الكونغرس الأمريكي يشنون هجوما حادا على قطر ويقولون إنها مستمرة في دعم وتمويل الإرهاب وتغذية التطرف عبر قناة الجزيرة الممولة حكوميا.
من سوريا إلى ليبيا إلى السودان، قطر دعمت الإخوان وجماعات أخرى متطرفة، مما قاد المنطقة لحالة من اللا استقرار، وعرقلت تصرفاتها جهود واشنطن وحلفائها من أجل تحقيق الاستقرار. ولمعرفة كيف تغذي قطر العنف والتطرف، فما علينا إلا مشاهدة المحطة التي تمولها الحكومة القطرية، وهي قناة الجزيرة، وما تبثه من تطرف تتغاضى عنه قطر. لذلك نحن نتفهم غضب جيرانها من سياستها وحثهم إياها للتغيير، وهذا ما نحاول فعله أيضا.
مذكرة الاتفاق الأمني التي وقعتها قطر مع وزير الخارجية الأمريكي السابق ريكس تيلرسون محل استياء في الكونغرس، وأعضاء كثيرون يطالبون مايك بومبيو وزير الخارجية الحالي بالكشف عن تفاصيلها، وما إذا كانت بنودها تضمن منع ووقف دعم وتمويل قطر للمجموعات الإرهابية والمتطرفة.
الإدارة الأمريكية وقطر وقعتا مذكرة من أجل مكافحة تمويل الإرهاب داخل قطر، والسؤال: هل يمكن أن نعرف تفاصيل المذكرة؟ وما هو دورنا في التأكد من تنفيذ قطر لبنود؟
Which is why Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Egypt, and Bahrain cut ties with Qatar this past June. Doha must take serious measures to fundamentally alter its policies. No more bait and switch, and no more backsliding. We need real commitments from Qatar to end its permissive attitude and actions toward.
The nation of Qatar, unfortunately, has historically been a funder of terrorism at a very high level. And in the wake of that conference, nations came together and spoke to me about confronting Qatar over its behavior. We have to stop the funding of terrorism. I decided, along with Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, our great generals and military people, the time had come to call on Qatar to end its funding. They have to end that funding. And its extremist ideology in terms of funding. For Qatar, we want you back among the unity of responsible nations. I want to thank Saudi Arabia and my friend King Salman and all of the countries who participated in that very historic summit. It was truly historic. There has never been anything like it before, and perhaps there never will be again. Hopefully, it will be the beginning of the end of funding terrorism. It will therefore be the beginning of the end to terrorism. No more funding.
Mr. Secretary, Fadi Mansour with Al Jazeera. I want to go back to Yemen, and I have one brief question on Syria. On Yemen, at what point it becomes unacceptable for Yemeni children and innocent civilians to be killed with American weapons? Is the U.S. support to Saudi Arabia and the coalition in Yemen unconditional? And on Syria?
No, it is not unconditional.
What is it conditional?
That they do their everything humanly possible to avoid any innocent loss of life, and they support the UN brokered peace process.
On Syria,
you do have a terrible image problem at the moment. Are you going to do something about that? I mean, you don't have to execute as many people as you do.
Well, on this issue, we have a fundamental difference. In your country, you do not execute people. We respect it. In our country, the death penalty is a part of our laws, and you have to respect this, as it is the law, part of the law in the United States and other countries. Now that Saudi Arabia stepped up and taken decisive action in Yemen, in supporting the Syrian opposition, in standing up to Iran, people are saying, why are the Saudis doing this? It's reckless. It's one of those positions where it's damn if we do, damn if we don't. Make up your mind. Do you want us to lead, or do you want us to support? And if you want us to support, who's going to lead? The Iranian government itself alleged that we bombed their embassy in Sana'a, and it turns out to be false.
But are you saying you haven't killed civilians from the air?
Look, the Houthis have been bombing a lot of people from the ground indiscriminately. The Houthis have been using child soldiers, and I don't hear you complaining about this or any of your colleagues. We have no interest in trying to harm civilians. Iran's record has been one of war and destruction, terrorism, assassination, destabilization, interference in the affairs of other countries. And the concern that most countries in the world have is that Iran not use these funds in order to fund these destabilizing activities, and instead use those funds in order to improve the standard of living of its people.
But the Saudis did the right thing. The Saudis and their allies did the right thing. We cannot allow Iran to proceed unimpeded and exert Persian domination throughout the region.
And there are many more examples of the widespread corruption. Take Sadiq Laranjani, the head of Iran's judiciary. He's worth at least $300 million. He got this money from embezzling public funds into his own bank account. The Trump administration sanctioned Laranjani in January for human rights abuses because we weren't afraid to tackle the regime at its highest level. Call me crazy, you won't be the first. But I'm a little skeptical that a thieving thug under international sanctions is the right man to be Iran's highest-ranking judicial official. Former IRG officer and Minister of Interior Sadiq Masouli is nicknamed the Billionaire General. He went from being a poor IRGC officer at the end of the Iran-Iraq War to being worth billions of dollars. How'd that happen? He somehow had a knack for winning lucrative construction and oil trading contracts from businesses associated with the IRGC. Being an old college buddy of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad just might have had something to do with it as well. The Ayatollahs are in on the act too. Judging by their vast wealth, they seem more concerned with riches than religion. These hypocritical holy men have devised all kinds of crooked schemes to become some of the wealthiest men on earth while their people suffer. Grand Ayatollah Makaram Shirazi is known as the Sultan of Sugar for his illicit trading of sugar, which has generated over $100 million for him. He's pressured the Iranian government to lower subsidies to domestic sugar producers while he floods the market with his own, more expensive imported sugar. This type of activity puts ordinary Iranians out of work.